This year in AP Bio, we're going to be doing a flipped classroom model where you'll be attending the lectures virtually and we'll be doing activities in class like labs. This way, when you have questions on things where you might actually need direct help, you can get that, but when you need things that are just content acquisition, you can do that on your own. On the upside, you can pause, rewind, go back whenever you need to, so hopefully this will help out in the long run. This PowerPoint overall is more of an introductory PowerPoint looking at the course as a whole. Here you can see a copy of the course requirements for AP Biology, the so-called course at a glance. You should be getting a copy of this in class as well. This is the key components. It doesn't list out every single thing you need to know, but these are the large testable categories as well as their percentage of test makeup. So you will see that we will follow this order pretty closely. There's one or two components that I disagree with the order and I move them around, but by the end of the course you'll have covered all of it. One thing that you need to be aware of in these science courses is that all AP Science courses have science practices. Some of them are pretty straightforward, like concept explanations or analyzing a visual or asking questions. Other ones get more complicated and mathematical with graphing and statistics and argumentation. So please realize that the way this course is designed, every single test question is going to be tied to a course learning objective as well as a science practice. So you're going to have to be doing these things as you go. It's not learning science, I suppose, it's more doing science, which is one reason we're looking at these components. But you'll notice that the various units tie into these overarching big ideas of biology that serve as foundational components for the course, allowing you to create meaningful connections. So the overall big ideas we're looking at are evolution, energetics, like the flow of energy, information storage, and system interactions. These big ideas will tie together all of the components and be reoccurring throughout all units. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. How will your actual learning be assessed? Well, this course has an AP exam, just like most AP classes do. There is going to be a 3-hour long test that will incorporate 60 multiple choice questions and 6 free response questions. You are allowed to use a calculator on all components, so just be aware that that is something you're going to want to get used to. The 60 multiple choice questions will pull from all 8 of those units that we looked at on previous slides, and then you will have 6 free response questions as of the current design. 2 long free response questions that'll be between 8 and 10 points, and 4 sort of intermediate questions that'll be about 4 points each. Biology, there's only one way to get each of those points pretty much, so you do need to know your content and your vocabulary, which we'll be stressing throughout the unit. So we'll be tying all that in as we go. Those FRQs are important though because the task verbs are very specific. If they're asking you to calculate, that's fairly obvious, but if they're asking you to describe something, you should know that that means here, provide relevant characteristics of a specified topic. If they ask you to explain, you'll notice that that's significantly larger in what they are expecting. A describe, provide relevant characteristics, that might be a sentence, whereas an explain, provide information about how or why a relationship, process, pattern, whatever occurs using evidence and or reasoning to support or qualify a claim. That means explains are going to be harder and require more than describes. Identifies, indicate or provide information about a specific topic, that might be a single word. So knowing what the power word or task verb, whatever they want to call it this year, what it's asking for, that can be very helpful when you go to write FRQs. Now, outside of the basic assessment things, looking at the actual components of the course, we need to remember that this is still a science course. Okay, science is a concerted human effort to understand, or at least to understand better, the history of the natural world and how the natural world works. But what you're looking at overall is a study of the observable physical evidence that forms as the basis of that understanding. We need to, of course, realize that science is never truly objective. There's always going to be bias. Phenomenon are going to involve interacting variables that are incredibly complex. So what we typically try to do is we try to ask questions about the world around us and find some way to answer those questions. But at its most basic level, scientists make models. We make patterns and plans and representations. We analyze complex situations, we determine what's irrelevant and we create models of systems to understand the world. That model gives us predictive power that we wouldn't have otherwise. Now, is science the only way of understanding? Of course it's not. Okay, there are many different ways of understanding the world. Science is just one of those. The basic principles of science are pretty straightforward. Okay, you're going to have claims based on evidence. That evidence must be observable, falsifiable, all that kind of thing, and it must be subject to peer review. Why? We need to minimize bias. We need to be aware that you can't really prove or disprove anything absolutely. We can support, we can refute, that's about it. Okay, but we can never establish an absolute truth because we're relying upon things like probability and statistics to really understand the world around us. And if you don't know, probability deals with predicting the likelihood of future events, whereas statistics is involved in the analysis of the frequency of past events. So probability is a theoretical branch of mathematics, while stats is an applied branch of mathematics, but we combine these things to really understand the world. When we go into most of the math that we do in this course, we're going to be looking for what's called 95% confidence. That means that we have 95% confidence that the answer that we are giving is the right one. Therefore, we are supporting our hypothesis or maybe refuting if the whatever is disagreeing with it. But 95% confidence, what does that really mean? That means that one time in 20, we're wrong. And that's an acceptable allowance for that component. So just be aware that probability theory and statistical theory underlie science, which is one of those reasons why we can't really know anything with any absolute certainty. You also must engage in vigorous debate. The more voices that are heard at the table, the more robust and productive the scientific conversation will be. You're never going to exclude a viewpoint. You're never going to exclude data points that disagree with what you think. That's not good science. And then we are only going to really move forward together if we share what we know and we work together to refine science as we move forward. So overall, these are those basic principles. Now, what do scientists actually do? Again, like we said, scientists make models. They try to predict the world through these models. And one of the major ways that we do that is the so-called scientific method. Now, there is no one scientific method. You probably have this idea of like, oh, you're asking questions, and then from those questions, you develop a hypothesis, and then you expect, and then you look at your actual, and then you support or refute your hypothesis. But that is really just one way of doing science. It's not the only way of doing science. I think more things have been discovered by accident than have actually been discovered through this linear process that has been beat in your head. But science is more of an iterative process. Okay, it goes around and around and around, coming around to these general ideas. Some of the things we need to know, though, sort of base vocabulary, is what is the difference between a hypothesis and a prediction? So if you say a hypothesis is an if-then statement, I'm going to be very annoyed. Okay, if I do this, then this must be true. That is a prediction. That is using the word hypothesis incorrectly. There are multiple types of hypotheses. We're not really going to get into that right now. But a hypothesis is a conjecture based on knowledge obtained while formulating your question. It might be very specific. It might be very broad. But a hypothesis is a way of explaining how something is going to occur, but it's non-directional. Okay, a hypothesis establishes a relationship between two factors. It does not predict a result. A prediction will apply a direction to that. So I have a hypothesis that the amount of fertilizer that I add to my plants will alter their growth. Fine. I predict that if I add more fertilizer, the plant will grow better. That is a prediction. Okay, now in reality, too much fertilizer will also kill a plant. So it's not really a complete reality, but hopefully we can see the difference between a hypothesis and a prediction. More fundamental than that is the idea that there's a difference between theory and law. Okay, you guys might have this misconception that a theory can become a law, but a theory cannot become a law. A theory is something that tries to explain how something occurs. A theory is mechanistic within the broader situation, whereas a law states what happens. Okay, no theory can ever sort of be considered final since new evidence might be discovered. So theories can be disproven or rejected, but laws differ. Laws differ from scientific theories in that they don't sort of posit a mechanism or explain a phenomenon. Laws are distillations of repeated observations. Okay, laws are only applicable to exact circumstances, but laws are what happens, whereas a theory is more how something happens, which is fundamentally different. Overall, then, how is research actually done in the real world? Well, there's really three types of research. In vivo work is field research in the living, within the living, in vivo. This refers to experimentation using whole living organisms, studies out in the environment. Overall effects can be observed. In vitro work is going to be laboratory experimentation. You create simplified systems, models, and you support those systems with data from your field research so that you have controlled environments, so that you can narrow down those components. And in silico work, you're going to be using mathematical models or computer simulations to try to represent reality. So how is research done? Typically, it's all three of these things coming together to really understand the world around us. The research community is part of society at large, and the relationship of science and society has become clearer over time as we have added technology and we put new technology to work in our research. This process has become significantly more complicated. Overall, there are a couple of base ideas that you're going to see as slide styles that you're going to see throughout the course. Here's an example. So if you see a review slides are typically either review from previous units or review from previous courses. This is an example of a review slide looking at the domains and sort of biological classification. You're expected to have learned base biological classification in honors bio and possibly in life science in middle school. If you don't remember the basic biological classification, this is based upon that hierarchy idea: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. There are more subdivisions to this, but these are the big steps. You used to have to know all the way through the phylum for AP biology, but now you just need to know through the kingdoms. Overall, there are three domains of life. Okay, you have domain bacteria, which is this blue section over here. Domain bacteria is going to be the largest sort of subcomponent here, looking at all of those different types of bacteria that exist in the world. Okay, so domain bacteria is over there. And then you have domain archaea. Okay, domain archaea are this sort of branching here. These are also prokaryotic, just like bacteria, but they are in between bacteria and eukarya, where we belong. So these are sort of the weird ones. They're extremophiles: high salt, high heat, high acid, high radiation. They can survive in really strange systems. And they have some evolutionary traits that are in between the other two domains. We belong to domain eukarya, which is the remainder section up here. Domain eukarya, these are all of the eukaryotic organisms, so all of the ones with nuclei. We, of course, are part of animals within that structure. Okay, so domains, there are three domains: domain bacteria, domain archaea, and then domain eukarya. Within those domains, really depends upon which system of classification you are using. We're going to be using a very simple one. The kingdoms for domain bacteria, there is one kingdom that you are expected to know, and that is kingdom Eubacteria, EU bacteria. The prefix EU means true, so these are the true bacteria, all these ones over here. Domain archaea has one kingdom that you're expected to know. Okay, domain archaea has one kingdom, kingdom archaea bacteria. Just put the two words together. Within eukarya, we have four kingdoms. Okay, you have the oldest of the four eukaryotic kingdoms, the protists. Okay, and the protists are the ancestors for everything else. So animals, fungus, and plants all evolved from the protists. But you have kingdom protista, okay, you have kingdom fungi, you have kingdom plantae, and you have kingdom animaliae, and we obviously belong to kingdom animaliae. So review slides are going to be introducing previous content that you're expected to know, and I hope that it is indeed review. But for most part, I assume that you have forgotten things in this course, so we will go over review things as we move forward. And then the last type of slide that you're going to see is the so-called IE slides, or the illustrated examples. Illustrated examples are going to be trying to apply some sort of concept or vocabulary term or idea to the real world. Looking at an example, you are not expected to memorize the ins and out of all of the examples, but the illustrated examples that I have chosen for these slides are all ones that are suggested in the standards for College Board. That does mean that they are technically testable, but what would happen is you would be provided with a certain amount of information in the question and then be expected to apply it. So if you already know the illustrated example ahead of time, it saves you a lot of time and effort and heartache. So in this example, this is an illustrated example where you apply basic science reasoning. The science question here was, does camouflage affect predation rates on two populations of mice? So I would hypothesize that camouflage would have an impact on predation. The ones that can camouflage themselves better are going to avoid predation. So I would predict that those with better camouflage are more likely to survive than those without camouflage. So I look at an example here. We have a beach habitat and a inland habitat, and we can see that the light models have camouflage in the beach, and the dark models have camouflage in the inland habitat. Okay, what this did, we looked at the percentage of attacked models, and you can see that the models that are non-camouflaged are much more likely to be impacted by the predators attacking them, and we can conclude that the results are consistent with the prediction that the mouse models with camouflage coloration would be preyed on less often than those camouflaged mouse models. So the experiment supports the camouflage hypothesis. Now, do we have controls here, confounding variables, that kind of thing? I don't really know. We don't really have a lot of experimental evidence. Okay, we're not applying any sort of statistics, so the advanced forms of hypotheses like null and alternative hypotheses don't really apply, but we'll get into more detailed studies as we move forward. Okay, that wraps up the first PowerPoint for the course. If you have any questions, please talk to me.